So, as you can probably already tell from the title of the video, I got a little surprise guest for you guys today. Um, it's not going to be a regular daily mass review video, and you could say that these types of videos only happen once a lifetime. Um, so, I'd like to introduce our special guest. If they would mosey on over here, not on their own two legs. Hello, this is my wife Sam. She's also very special, but this is Joseph.
How do I? There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
He's
That's Joseph.
asleep.
Yeah, he's asleep right now.
Yeah.
He's just chilling. But yeah, we're going to talk about the verse story today.
Mm.
So, yeah, exciting. Roll the intro. Okay, so, yeah, birth story. Let's give some context first, because I feel like what happened requires a little bit of context, just from the lead up to it. So, Sam had something called gestational diabetes, which is basically a form of diabetes that you get only while you're pregnant. So she had to kind of change her diet. She had to take her sugar every once in a while. But the main concern with diabetes is how big the baby's going to be. And there was a lot of talk before the baby came that they were going to induce her on her due date. But then as they continue to do scans, they do ultrasounds. They don't normally do ultrasounds every week, but because of the gestational diabetes, Sam had to do ultrasounds every week. The baby started getting big and big and big and started to get really big. And the ultrasounds, which of course have, I think it's a 20% margin of error. So like it could have been nothing at all. And it didn't end up being as big as they thought it was going to be, but they were very concerned that the baby was going to be too big, and that if Sam still wanted to deliver the baby naturally, they would want to induce her as soon as possible.
Yeah.
To make it safer.
They also have this really scary name for big babies. So it's called a macrosomic baby.
That's really, like, I don't know.
So if they think the baby is going to be more than 8 pounds, 13 ounces, then they call it a macrosomic baby.
Yeah.
So every time the ultrasound tech would be like, look at this macrosomic baby with this giant head. And I was like, thanks.
Fun. So yeah, the main reason that they thought the baby was so big is because Joseph had a really big head. And that was definitely true. It was even bigger than they thought it was going to be when he came out. But anyway, so we were on, I think it was a Tuesday night, so this would have been what? Late July, like 3rd, 4th week of July.
Our due date was July 31st, by the way.
Yeah, and the baby was born on July 24th, so a week early. But we were just having dinner. I think this is also the day that you scared me because you choked.
Was it that day?
I think those were both the same day. Where she just kind of like choked, and like I couldn't give her the Heimlich because, pregnant belly. So I had to like kind of smack her on the back of the back, and that worked okay, but that was kind of scary. Anyway, later that day you felt like your water had broken, but it wasn't like the gush that you were expecting. And you seemed okay, and you weren't having contractions, so we thought, hey, I mean, if you start having contractions, we'll call the midwife. If not, then maybe it's nothing. Because there's a lot of...
We're first-time parents.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things in pregnancy, too, where, like, you think it's a big deal, and then it's not really. The midwife's like, right? And the other thing is, too, like, people can have, like, lots of false contractions, and people can have false labor and stuff, so we weren't stressing about it. And so we went on our merry way, and then Sam had an ultrasound the next day, and we said, okay, we'll ask her to check the fluid level, because if the fluid level got lower, then theoretically that would mean that your water broke, right? And the ultrasound tech checked it, everything looked normal, everything looked fine. The fluid level was even better than normal. It was very confusing, and so we were like, okay, fine, it was probably nothing. We have our friends over for dinner, and everything goes on as normal. Thursday morning, so I was asleep. She went to the ultrasound, through the midwife clinic, and they tested you for fluid, like for amniotic fluid.
Yes.
Because they're like, like maybe it did break. We should just check you just to be sure. And you were like, okay. And then they checked you and they're like, okay, so we're going to see you in the hospital in an hour.
Because your water did break.
Your water did break. We'll see you in the hospital in an hour. So they're going to induce her because she went into her water broke, but she didn't go into labor. Like, you didn't have contractions. So that means they have to induce you because there's a whole bunch of danger with that, like bacterial infections and things like that.
Yeah.
So that complicated matters for sure. So she came home. I was still asleep. She woke me up and said, hey, we're going to the hospital in an hour.
We're having this baby.
We're having a baby today. I was like, oh, okay. First coffee. Then you can explain what happened. So we go to the hospital. And our hospital was pretty nice. We had our own private room,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say about the hospital. The hospital was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we didn't know how long we were going to be there for sure. So I think by the end of it, you ended up being out in labor for 22 hours.
Yeah.
22 hours.
Something like that.
Um,
And it would have been, I think it would have been a full day, but the first couple hours we just kind of settled in.
Yeah, yeah. I guess theoretically we were there for a whole day, but before the baby was born. But you were actually in labor, like they induced you, and then from the inducement it was 22 hours or something. And just to give perspective for the teens who are watching this, normal labor is about 12 to 14 hours. So
Yeah, typical labor is
Al-
12 to 14 hours.
So almost double.
And then the term for like super short labor is called precipitous labor. Those are people that like give birth in the car because like there wasn't enough time or like,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, so we were there the whole night. We had to change midwives like in the morning because they had already done a whole 24-hour shift or something with us, and like it was hectic for sure.
when we got to the hospital, we got all set up. And yeah, as James has mentioned, since my water was broken, there was risk of infection. So the first thing they did was set me up with an IV. And my original plan was to go completely natural and have like full range of motion to like walk around and like deal with pain because that's
Yeah.
how I function with
Yeah.
pain. That's how we had been practicing. But that didn't happen. God had different plans. So I got the IV. Turns out I normally have good veins, but this time around, no. So they pricked me 5 different times before they finally got it in. And the anesthesiologist on the floor was the one that ended up getting it. And so they put in fluid, like just like water to hydrate
Yes,
me.
water.
And then Pitocin, which is what induces you and gets those contractions going, and then penicillin, which is an antibiotic. And they would punch me with full of penicillin every 4 to 6 hours, I think.
Yeah, you had what, like 6 bags of penicillin?
Yes.
Like 6 of those like little bags, which is like much more penicillin than you would normally get. But
Yeah,
you
it's
were, like, in
concentrated.
labor, and it's concentrated. Like, yeah, you were pumped full of drugs
Yep.
the whole time.
And which was not the plan at all.
Yeah, because you wanted to be able to move around and like
Oh
have
yeah,
very
okay.
natural labor.
So first they put on the IV. You could still move with an IV cart. So I wasn't too worried about that, but what ended up happening was, obviously I had a huge 9-month pregnant belly, and they had these like things strapped over me with a metal monitoring system that tracked the baby's heartbeat and my heartbeat. And they're flat, but my belly is round. And they use kind of like this gel thing to keep it on, as well as these bands, but it is not efficient. And I've joked with James many times that someone on Shark Tank, Dragon's Den, one of those people, figure out a way that this stays on your belly, because it kept sliding off because I kept moving around.
Yeah.
And they would have to take it off every time I went to the bathroom, or if I moved, the monitor would like freak out.
All of this is to say, you wanted to move, you couldn't move. You had to stay sitting in the bed in the one position which you really didn't want to do labor in, and you were kind of stuck there because of all the stuff that was stuck to you.
Yeah,
Because
but
of the situation that we were in.
yeah, but to be fair, they did let me move for quite a while. So for the first 6 or 7 hours while I was being induced, slowly being dilated. So this is between 2:30 and 9:30 p.m. on Thursday. I would move around sort of just to go to the bathroom or just stand or sit on the edge of the bed or whatever. And then finally, by the time it got to, I don't know, 7:30, 8:30, we put on praise and worship music, and James was a really amazing partner. And and
I'm glad I'm recording this.
I
For the
told you
future.
this.
I know, I'm just saying,
Okay.
now I have video proof.
Yeah. And so we put on praise and worship music, and then I would listen to the song and concentrate on what the words were saying. And James would help me breathe through each contraction because it did get harder. Oh, I should mention that. So we said that my water did break on Tuesday, but it kind of only broke a little bit, and they think that basically the water broke and
Yeah.
it punctured a hole, but then the baby's head was so big
Yeah.
that it blocked the hole.
Yeah, yeah. Basically, all the problems were caused by how big our baby's head was.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good summary of why the problems were so.
But we love him and his big head. So, yeah, where was I?
You're talking about how they broke the sack.
Oh, okay. So I had been on Pitocin for 7-8 hours, and they tell you that when you get to level 8 through 12 is normally where you feel like big pain, you're dilated a bunch. I was playing Sudoku with James at this point, happily, eating food. They'd ask me like what my pain was from 1 to 10, and I'd be like 3, 4, doing great, feeling fine. And so finally they got me to 20, and the max is 30. And the midwives don't have clearance to push it past 20. So they called the OB on call. And he decided instead of pushing it to 21 and taking over my care, that he would try and break my waters, like the rest of it. And that's where the gush happened. So I don't know if everybody has the gush in some capacity, but that's where my gush was.
Yeah.
And that's when the pain actually picked up, and that's where we left off with the praise and worship music. So James would help me breathe through each contraction, and then I would think of a person that I wanted to pray for through each contraction. And that actually really worked for a long time. And I would sway and sit on the edge of the bed, and I was managing okay. It was super painful, but I was managing okay. Probably could have done it.
Yeah, there just came a point where we'd already been sleep deprived, and we were like, what, 12, 1 in the morning, and we kind of had to make a decision about whether or not this baby was going to come soon.
Yeah.
And the baby was going to come soon. Like, if the midwife could have been like, hey, yeah, the midwife's going to, like, or the baby's, like, coming. But they checked, and it was still a long ways away. And there was just a certain point where Sam had to sleep if she was going to be able to get through the labor.
Like the really hard part.
Yeah. And so we decided that you were going to get an epidural.
Yeah.
Just for the fact that you needed to sleep. Like, I don't think you got it because the pain was too much. I think you got it because you couldn't handle the pain because of how tired you were.
I was tired, and then also the mobility thing.
Yeah.
Because there came a point where it kept slipping off the monitors to the point where they were like, it would be best if you just stayed, like, in bed.
Yeah. And when you were staying in bed was when it was most painful for you. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, with the epidural, you definitely have to stay in bed, but at least...
It's not that bad at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd say the epidural was probably the most pleasant part of the whole experience. It was very easy, very quick. The relief was immediate. Like, and you actually got some sleep during all of that, which is good considering how long the labor ended up being. Because you were only in like an hour 10 then, I think, or hour 11 or 12.
Yes, that was
Something like
that was
that.
about halfway through.
It's about halfway. So one of the things I wanted to hit on is this whole idea that men, you shouldn't want to be in there because it's gross and it's ugly and you'll never forget what it looks like and you'll never forget the trauma, and because women by and large forget the trauma, and every time I hear Sam tell the story of the birth story, she forgets parts of it, which is good, right? Because you forget those traumatizing things, you remember the good things. Like, she remembers that I was a good partner, which I'm very grateful for because she could have forgotten that. But you know, you forget the things that are hard. For the guy, right, there's this kind of this notion that labor is a very gross and grotesque thing, and it's necessary, but if you can avoid it or avoid being a part of it as much as possible, and it's going to be unpleasant for you and whatever. And I know another Catholic guy who I respect a lot who was of this attitude, and even after they had their baby, he was still kind of this attitude where, like, it was very hard for him to see his wife go through that much pain, to be there, to see all the dirty, like, crap out of all of it. Like, he still remembers that experience very vividly and not in a nice way. Which kind of takes out some of, like, the good things that you're supposed to get from labor. right? The good things you're supposed to get from giving birth to a child. I didn't feel any of that. I thought it was awesome. I loved every part of it. I wouldn't have wanted to be anywhere else. I was never grossed out by anything that happened. I was never afraid. Um, I think that had a lot to do with how many people were praying for us, but I think it was also because of just the attitude that I had, that I trusted in God and I trusted Sam, and that was the most important thing, right? Because if I didn't trust that Sam could do it, and I didn't trust that God was looking out for us, yeah, it would have been a very scary experience. It's very painful, right? There's bleeding, and there's crap everywhere, and there's fluids just generally happening. Like,
Oh boy.
it's not it's not like it's not how it is in the movies, as they say, which I already kind of knew, but that, I mean, just to hit on that point. But the thing I think that was the most important through all of that was trust. If Sam had not trusted me and believed that I could be a good partner and that I could support her and love her in the way that she needed to be loved throughout the entirety of that 22-hour labor, it would have been very hard for her, much harder than it was. And if I didn't trust that Sam could do it, that if I didn't think that Sam could go through that pain on her own, right? Like, if I didn't think that I was just there to support her and I had to accept the fact that she was going to be in pain, there was something I could do about it, and trust her that she was going to be okay. And then also that if we both didn't trust God to get us through that and that everything was going to be fine, would have been much, much harder, much more difficult. And the main reason I mention that, especially considering I'm making this video for my teens, is when you are thinking about relationship and you're thinking about dating and you're thinking about vocation, it's very important. The period before you marry somebody is very important for this reason. And there's other reasons I'm going to talk about in the video, but for this reason, trusting the person that you're marrying, trusting the person that you're going to have kids with and have vocation with, it's one of the most important things. And that trust is built up over time spent with that person, getting to know that person, getting to see the things about that person that makes them beautiful in the eyes of God. So you could learn to appreciate those things, right? Things that are deeper than just the things that you see on the outside, right? Deeper than the personality traits or the quirks that you may like about the person at the outset. You need to go deeper into the things that God created that person with, so that you know that you can trust that person when things get tough. And that's one of the most important things to know when you're trying to date somebody or trying to find vocation with someone. That doesn't just apply to marriage, it applies to any vocation, right? If you're going to enter into a vocation of priesthood and you're going to spend your entire life serving God, it stands to reason that you should learn something about who God is so that you can trust him when you need to, right? And that the character of that relationship is even a stronger type of trust than it is in marriage with God, because I get to see those things that God created in somebody to help me to trust him through this other person. But in these other vocations, you just have to have that relationship with God or the church, which can be easier if that's the vocation you're called to, and harder if it's not. But that's part of the beauty of it. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. The other thing, and I think this goes into the we'll talk about the last part of the labor here and like the first week.
Okay.
But the other thing that's very important when you want to have a child is you need to have a desire to grow in holiness. If you don't have that, if you don't see the pain and the tiredness and the stress and the anxiety you're going through as things that are making you holier, you will lose your mind. You will go insane.
You won't want to have lots of kids.
And you won't want to have lots of kids. That's true too, right? If we can't look back at the experience that we had as being positive because it helped us grow in holiness, then it'd be very hard to find other positives in parts of it, right? Some parts are just hard.
Yep.
They're just painful, right? There's no like beauty to it. It's just really sucked. But it made us so much holier than we would have been if we had not done that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gives you the meaning and the purpose behind it. That's what inspires you to have more kids. That helps you grow as a person. Helps you to learn to be more selfless, to be more like God in the way that you do things, in the way that you love each other. So, in the last part of the labor there, right, we chose to go with midwives.
Yeah.
And we chose to go with midwives because, you get to have this relationship with them all the way through. They're very nice, and they're there with you at the birth. They help take care of the baby afterwards. They keep your care afterwards. Like, you're always being cared for by the same person who you built up a relationship with of trust, right? And
Sound familiar?
I kid you not, there was at least 15 people in the room when Sam delivered the baby.
Yes.
Because of how big they thought the baby was going to be, the OB had to be called, and then the entire pediatric department was in there.
Yeah.
And then we had the head
It's
nurse and
also-
this nurse and this nurse, and we had like 5 midwives. Like it was like an event. It was like an event. It's like they called all the people who knew anything about having babies to the same room
Yes.
to try and make sure that this baby came out of Sam without causing major damage because of how
Yes.
big his freaking head was.
It wasn't just that. It was
His
also
head was freaking big, Sam.
It wasn't just that. It was also because my water had been broken.
Yes,
I'd been pushing
yes.
for a while. I've been there for so long. I should probably mention, and this is not anything negative about the hospital that we gave birth at, but there were so many people giving birth in the time frame that I was giving birth that I was like squeezed in to like an available room. So I'm not gonna say that like I was there for a full 24 hours in that room in particular, that maybe we were trying to open up the room. And to be fair, so it's not soundproof in labor and delivery, so like we would hear other moms like giving birth, baby cry, and then silence. Other baby cry, silence. So we were like, I feel like we were one of the people that were in there the longest. So I feel like it was
Yeah.
also that.
And the OB was in there, and she said, "Okay, I think we can actually get this baby to come out." This is after a whole night of labor, right?
Yes.
It's starting to speed up. The active labor is actually starting. They're having Sam do pushing, and the OB comes in and says, "Okay, I see the head. We can get this baby out, but I might need to use forceps, and also I might have to do an episiotomy to get this baby to come out of you because his head is so freaking big."
Yeah.
With the use of forceps and the episiotomy, they managed to get the baby out. He was delivered. Everything was fine. He was perfectly healthy. The baby was chilling the whole time. Like all the stress around the baby, like the baby, his life signs were always, his vital signs were always consistent.
Yeah.
He was always chilling. He came out. He breathed right away.
Mm-hmm.
He was fine. Like the baby didn't have like the baby was completely oblivious to all of the stress,
Yeah.
which is a pretty sound description of our baby in general. I think.
Yeah.
The stress is always about the baby, but the baby's not causing the stress. It's just chilling. So, yeah. And then the postpartum period began, and that was definitely, I think, labor was definitely difficult, considering everything that happened.
Right.
But I think what was more difficult and more challenging was definitely the postpartum, like the first 2 weeks after the baby. Because there's a certain element of, and I guess we were talking to some of our friends yesterday who kind of like agreed with this notion that like anytime that you have something happen to your body, like a major invasive surgery, there's a certain amount of trauma that happens from it that's not just physical but is also psychological, because your body has to deal with the fact that something has happened to me.
Yeah.
Right? And so for Sam, a lot of the pain that she would have felt, she didn't feel because of the epidural. And the mental trauma, I think, was even worse because of that came after. And so the psychological like battle that Sam had with the trauma that she was experiencing after the baby was very difficult.
Yeah.
And
I also
yeah.
don't want to scare you in the sense that, like, I know that that time during my postpartum was for me. Like, I know that the challenges and the sacrifice and all of that time during those 2 weeks were used by God in such an amazing way. And I still think that God used me as an instrument during that time. And I also think that every birth and postpartum recovery is different. Like, some women go through the postpartum perfectly fine. But I think mine was especially challenging because I am such a type A organized personality, and I wanted to have lots of control during my labor and birth and postpartum, and I had very little, next to none. And so I think that's what made it so challenging. And I honestly believe that like future children would be different. But in this particular time, in this particular moment of our life, of my life, of our marriage, of our baby's life, that's what God wanted to do. So yeah, I feel good about it, despite the fact that we're talking about the fact that like I went through something traumatic.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because God called each of us to grow in holiness in different ways, although we were both taking care of the baby in that time. right? Like, you were being taught how not to be selfish by looking after yourself,
Yeah.
right? Which is not necessarily what you would think. Because you're a very type A personality and very much need to be in control of everything, it was really hard for you to accept the trauma of what had just happened
Yeah.
psychologically. And you spent that first week, I would say, apart from feeding the baby, just focusing on getting yourself better, right? And it was basically my job in the first week, 2 weeks, to take care of both of you,
Yeah.
which was definitely not what I was expecting. And it was definitely the hardest thing I've ever done, for sure. I think I must have said, that's normal, it's fine, it's normal, at least 200 times in the first 2 weeks. Even when I didn't know if it was normal or not. Just because, like, to keep everybody sane, it was like, everything's fine. Everything's fine, everything's normal, we're chill, we're cool. And it wasn't necessarily that I was lying about that, because I did feel that way, but it was kind of this, God was stretching me more than I'd ever been stretched before. But it
Same.
didn't feel like he was extending me beyond what I was capable of. It really
Right.
felt like he was stretching me to be better than I had been before. Which is a very surreal experience to, like, it's I don't know how I would describe this. It's like, for anybody who's ever done a competitive sport, right? For me it was running, and when you're running, right, like, the difference between somebody who runs a 50-second 400 meter and a 49-second 400 meter race is the difference between first place and eighth, right? Like, it's 1 second, but it's the difference between winning or losing. And you work your entire year to try and get 1 second faster, and then when you don't achieve that 1 second faster, you know, the year feels like a failure, which in perspective doesn't seem like a big deal. Like, so what, you didn't get 1 second faster, right? Like, well, how much has your life changed in purpose or meaning, right? But it just puts in perspective that, like, sometimes the stretch that you're trying to make to grow as a person does not seem big to everyone else, right? Doesn't seem like this stupendous thing. Even to you, it may not seem like a super stupendous thing to get 1 second faster. But when you do actually accomplish that, and God helps you to grow in that way, it's completely different. Like, you completely reached a new level of running, or reached a new level of holiness, or reached a new level of growth that you didn't even think was possible before. When you're looking, again, for vocation, and you're looking for someone to date, and you're looking for someone to spend your life with, not that any of my 15-year-old teens should do that right now, but in the
They're
future,
thinking about it, though.
you should be thinking about it. In the future, you need to look for somebody who not only has a desire to grow in holiness, but has a desire for you to grow in holiness, right? And it's not going to stop you from doing that, right? Like, there are many times where I could have stepped in and been like, we need help. We need to call on all the people. We need to, like, you know, we need to stop. We need to have somebody help us. This is not normal. We need to help. Like, you know, like, there are many times where I could have stepped in and been like, we can't do this.
Yeah.
But I never did, right? And neither did Sam. Neither one of us gave up on each other, and how hard it was. And I think that is super important. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.